Andrew Kavasilas. With decades of experience in Australian cannabis law reforms, long-time advocate, lobbyist and licensed grower, he will speak on the current state of play as state governments face stiff opposition by federal and international laws. Can the states really go it alone? Thank you, Andrew.
Hi all, thanks all for coming. It's near the end of the day and I'm sure you've appreciated Andrew's talk and Nikki's and Michelle's, and so I suppose my talk won't be so much on the medical benefits of cannabis but more what touches us all, the politics and the lack of medical cannabis that's in Australia and the rest of the world. I'll try to clarify or give you a better understanding of what's happening overseas, what appears to be happening in countries like Canada and America, and how and why that isn't really translating into the Australian setting. And also touch on what, the kind of announcements that some of our state premiers, our governments have been saying in the past, and I suppose touch on what the announcement yesterday and picking through the entrails and what that really means, if it means anything at all. So I have been involved since about 1999 with medical cannabis and industrial hemp. We've had a few law changes, we've had other things happen. I'm also with the Hemp Party as well, so I really view a lot of these politics or the political statements as in a political setting too. So as a Hemp Party, we're watching what other governments and other parties are doing to steal our votes, our hemp votes. And what's happened to those votes in the past is we have to be responsible for those. So as a party, we want people to vote for us for the right reasons. We're seeing through what the other parties are doing to try and secure that vote. So with medical cannabis, you probably have worked out a lot of it is political. We've got politicians saying that they're going to do things, and when things don't, it means that they didn't want to do things. So back in, I don't know if people remember, back in 2002, around 2000 to 2002, the New South Wales government under the premiership of Bob Carr tried to introduce a medical cannabis regime. They got an expert working party together. There was cross-party support. There was something like 24 recommendations made. They were handed down, and the government really couldn't move on any of them. Tony Abbott was with the Howard government at the time. He was the health minister, and they rejected any medical cannabis out of hand. In the meantime, we've watched states like the US, in California, say 1998, even before that, that Proposition 215. And what's happening in the US, in those states, we're seeing all this progress. In the US, under their constitution, they have states can, or citizens within a state can initiate a referendum question. So they have citizens-initiated referendums. So it started out in 1998, a guy called Dennis Perron got Proposition 215 up. So he got about, I think, under the state laws, 150,000 signatures. They got a question together on medical cannabis, and it went on the next ballot paper. It's very important to note that the Californian government and all those state governments that we're looking at now, they fought a no campaign. The Californian government didn't want medical cannabis up, and it actually received extra funding from the federal government in the US. And the federal government over there has given other states money when this has come up. So they've fought no campaigns. The first one got up, Proposition 215 in California, it got up, and then it was up to the government to initiate or allow medical cannabis use. They had to do this in the context of no support from the state government, no support from the federal government, no support from the medical profession, and so they devised a permit system where you could go and get a permit from a doctor. A doctor would sign something saying that medical cannabis may benefit you. You go and get your permit, and you can go and buy cannabis from a dispensary. It's a bit of a free-for-all, and we're all watching what's sort of been going on there. At the same time, we're seeing, well, we're not seeing any clinical trials. So, in spite of medical cannabis going on in all these US states, there's no medical trials. So, you'd think if medical cannabis has started in 1998, by not allowing access to universities and labs and clinical trials, that's giving, like present day, our government, when they're asked about medical cannabis, they keep saying, and various politicians, that there's not enough clinical research. And technically they're right. There isn't very much properly recognised medical cannabis, clinical trials, double-blind with placebos and so forth. There really is only a handful of them, and so governments and the AMA are quite right when they say there's no clinical trials, or we need more clinical trials. But in the meantime, what's happening is none of these states are able to do it. In Canada, another good example, you've got the Canadians are a Commonwealth country like us, but they have a Charter of Rights, a Bill of Rights. And what that gives the citizens a right, it gives them rights in terms of, say in 2002 there was a court case that went to the High Court. A couple of people in Canada were fighting the government, saying that they needed medical cannabis. They went to court, and it got right to the High Court. And the High Court found that, yes, indeed, these patients should have access to medical cannabis. Now, upon that ruling, under the Charter of Rights, the High Court then ordered the Canadian government to initiate a medical cannabis regime. In fact, gave them 1 year to do it. They ended up taking 2 years and came up with a very substandard regime, which involved a company growing a whole lot of different varieties down in mine shafts in Flin Flon in Canada, a company called Prairie Industries. In the meantime, it had taken that long that dispensaries and other supply regimes, all black market, had taken off. By the time the Prairie Industries and the government's preferred method had come to fruition, people had already sort of made up their own mind and were getting better. Also, what happened, the Canadians tried to bring in some... there is one lawful source of medical cannabis in the world, and it is out of an American agency called NIDA, the National Institute of Drug Abuse. And that is as far as what we know, the only lawful source of medical cannabis for scientific and medical research as described and as explained in the articles under the UN drug conventions. So NIDA did supply Canada with some cannabis, green vegetable matter like cannabis, but the people didn't like it at all. I've seen pictures of it. It was quite stemmy and leafy and had seeds, and it wasn't it looked like chaff basically compared to what even what the Canadian government was producing, which still looked like cannabis and heads, but still wasn't as good as what people were buying off the black market. So we've also seen this shift of what we would generally call medical cannabis now is what is recreational cannabis, is black market cannabis. So I suppose, my talk is really on the politics of it and how governments are trying to work with it. So in the US, like I was explaining about those states, they're all citizens-initiated referendums. The state governments weren't in favour of them, nor the medical profession, and nor are the federal laws in the US. You've got, and I should just say, the Dutch are the same. So the Dutch have got a small medical cannabis regime together, but in no way has it been embraced by the medical profession. And I think overarching still, you've got the case where the Dutch or the Netherlands government still has a prohibition applied on cannabis. The coffee shops and all the supply around that, they're all grey areas. And like in Canada, I was describing the dispensaries that have sprung up over Canada that sprang up by necessity to supply people are also in a grey area. In fact, at the moment there shouldn't be any. The only way you can access cannabis in Canada now is via mail order from a handful of licensed producers. But I also note that June, July this year, the Vancouver government produced a set of regulations to do with the operation of dispensaries in Vancouver City. So in Vancouver City, you've got 20,000 people involved in the medical cannabis industries. There's dispensaries which are not legal under federal law, but they are allowed, in fact, being virtually endorsed by the Vancouver municipal government now, and so they'll be licensing dispensaries now, given rules. You know, you can't have one too close to a school or things like that. So the grey areas are a lot to take in for governments. I was in Canada this year, and at the same time I was there, they had the three main researchers from the University of Sydney, Dr. McGregor, Dr. Alsop and Dr. Linciris were all over in Canada at the same time, trying to get information and work out how they could source cannabis for research here in Australia. They came back pretty disappointed. They also recognised lots of grey areas. What the government's saying, what the laws are, is quite different than what's happening on the ground. But I was there when the Health Minister, Rona Ambrose, the Canadian Health Minister, reacted to a more recent High Court decision where the court found that people should be able to use cannabis other than smoking, something that the government didn't want people to do, didn't want edibles to be made legal, didn't want refined cannabinoids to be made legal, or hashish or infused products. In response to that High Court decision, it was interesting to watch the Health Minister of Canada explain that they were still outraged at the initial decision in 2002, that the government was still going to fight tooth and nail against those decisions. Marijuana is not a medicine. Only Health Canada can approve a medicine. Generally, that kind of thing. So for our government to imagine that we could work substantially or in any meaningful way with the Canadian government to gain access to cannabis for medical research and so forth is not on the cards. So that leaves Australia and where we are now. I was explaining about Bob Carr and other governments, the ACT more recently, and even more recently the New South Wales government had a second medical cannabis inquiry. And these have all gone nowhere. They've all got us to the same end point, which is there's a problem with supply. Even if committees do find in favour of using medical cannabis, there's issues with supply, a lawful supply of medical cannabis. The health department has issues because there's no clinical trials. TGA has issues because there's no company sponsoring a product to be used. And of course the UN drug conventions, which are overarching, and really, like I tell many people, we're in the same boat. Our patients, people here who are sick, really in the same boat as most other people in the world. But the pressure is building, and we're watching. I mean, to get that announcement yesterday from the feds was pretty major. But when you really have a read into what they're trying to do, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of the Hemp Party, he's a government that's really just trying to make sure. I mean, governments work on votes. That's all they're really interested in, and they're saying things to try and encourage people to vote for them. That all of a sudden Malcolm Turnbull, the Health Department, are finding medical cannabis okay. I don't believe them. I haven't read anything in there that gives me any hope. In fact, when I have read right into what they have talked about, is I think Susan Lay said as long as it's a spray or something that you rub on, an oil that you rub on. I don't think they're very beneficial medical cannabis in terms of what people are using, what's recognised as medical cannabis. I mean, we're looking at even the trials that are proposed in New South Wales. I think they want to use a tincture for end-stage life pain for patients, and imported cannabis being vaporised. So we're left to assume that they're going to get cannabis from the dodgy pot from NIDA, from the US, and vaporise it for people in end-stage life with pain. Look, I'm not a doctor, but if you're in end stage of life and it's pain-related and you've got conditions, I think that's when you should be using heavy opiates rather than just cannabis. So what these what these studies could show is that pharmaceuticalised cannabis is not as good as street or conventional black market cannabis. So that also worries me. That could take another 5 years for us to get back to that same square one. I suppose the essence of what I'm saying to people is be very sceptical about what governments are saying, especially your premiers. No state government's going to be able to go this alone. That's what we do know. And so it's pretty timely now that the feds have stuck their head up. I'm very cynical of political parties. I've actually found that the Greens haven't been listening to us, and the Labor Party and Liberal, well, they keep away from us as much as they can. So the Greens in turn have started did the regulator bill, and again, trying to keep the hemp voters on their side as much as they can. But it was an ill-conceived idea, and I found that it to be quite a Trojan horse in the end. It gave an opportunity for the Greens, Labor, Liberal and National to stand in unison, saying that they were all in favour of medical cannabis, knowing full well that they would never be able to do such a thing. No other country has been able to do it. What made them think that we would be able to do it here in Australia? So, and to top that off, we've got an announcement yesterday by the government saying that they want to do what no other government in the world has been able to do. So that's how cynical we really have to view this. And I'm not being negative about it, because I'm actually quite positive about it. I'm a licensed grower. I'm still growing. I have a seed bank. My company, we're Vita Hemp and Medical Cannabis Limited. We want things to really progress. We want hemp seed foods to get up. I mean, again, we're looking at this government that made some pretty bold announcements yesterday, but this is the same government that remains, the only government in the world that hasn't allowed hemp seed food. So, it's a pretty big leap to not allow hemp seed food, to talk about, doing serious medical cannabis endeavours. So, but in terms of being positive, I was out there on Friday. We've got a big, just getting ready for some big cropping. So, out in the heat, planting hemp seed by hand, doing some trial planting so we can do our big plantings next year. I'm still very positive that if hemp seed food doesn't get up this year, it'll come up next year. But we have to keep the government's feet to the fire on these kinds of announcements and these kinds of opportunities for progress. And I think the same stands for medical cannabis. It is great that there is being announcements being made, albeit hollow. I think we should not be endorsing or being very openly positive or encouraging of governments making these announcements, when what we really need to see is action. And I was very pleased to see yesterday, at least, that the Greens came out, and others as well, and showed their disapproval of the announcement made by the feds yesterday. Medical cannabis politically has changed quite a bit in the last few years. Back when Bob Carr and the New South Wales government were talking about medical cannabis, it was all about cancer pain, HIV, MS, glaucoma, and pain, chronic pain untreatable by conventional medicines. Governments around Australia and the world managed to ignore all that. We watched the reports collect dust and go nowhere. And then, almost out of the blue, paediatric epilepsy came up. And it's an issue that the governments can't ignore. And although they've tried, I've watched premiers hold the parents' hands and sick children and just lie straight up to them. That's how I've seen it, because I knew that there's no way that this premier could do anything, but certainly did want to take photo opportunities and did want to be seen to be doing something. Again, they're politicians; they want your vote. Now nothing's really came of any of those announcements, and so that's why it's very important for everyone here, especially, and to tell your friends, really read what these politicians are saying. Try and get into the fine print, and if they can, we'll know when we're getting close, when it will be said that Australia is taking a step that is far beyond what any other country has taken, and they really mean it. And so, until I see that, I'll still hold their feet to the fire and be very cynical of any any comments and any announcements they make, and I just feel sorry for people that when they believe it and they, throw it all behind the Greens regulator bill, and we'll throw it all behind the New South Wales parliamentary inquiry into medical cannabis that had, headed up by the Shooters Party and Labor and Liberal. They're all there, unanimous, and then the government just turns around and says no. That was the state government, but still they wouldn't have, still would have needed federal approval. I think many would be aware or heard of the Norfolk Island endeavours to try and grow medical cannabis on Norfolk Island. Again, just stumped and swamped and knocked on the head by the federal government, just as simple as that. If that had gone ahead, that would have been the first time in any country in the world where a government had got involved in the production of medical cannabis or cannabis for the use. I suppose, the real sting in the tail is, before we get too negative, as I say, I am very positive. I'm growing. I'm continually travelling around and speaking to politicians and ministers and lobbying for changes for cannabis law reform. As far as the Hemp Party goes and our policies, the way they stand now is that we obviously have a priority on medical and industrial cannabis. We want to see hemp seed food get up. We want to see the ban lifted that will give impetus to the broader hemp industries. We'd like to see proper medical cannabis get up. And in terms of recreational, I think the best thing the Hemp Parties can do is to tell the governments basically recreational cannabis is doing very well. It doesn't need help. It's doing about $5 billion a year on the Australian black market. And if the governments have got time for cannabis law reforms, they really should concentrate on industrial hemp seed food and medical cannabis. And that's as a party where we would focus, and we would more focus on an inquiry, a federal inquiry into the obstacles, the actual bottleneck of obtaining cannabis for medical and scientific research purposes. And I suppose I'll just go back a bit to NIDA. I spoke about being the only lawful source of medical cannabis in the world. More recently, the Australian governments or state governments introduced saliva testing. Now, in order to get those up and endorsed, Vic Rhodes, I think, paid about $500,000 to some researchers at Swinburne University to establish once and for all how bad cannabis was for driving. This group did go and get a batch. They come in tins from NIDA, a tin of 150 joints, 2 layers, about 75 layers 75 joints on each layer, so that was the only lawful source of medical cannabis or for scientific and research purposes. And the Vic government seemed to have no trouble getting cannabis for their kind of research. So NIDA has been quoted back in 2010 in a court case over in the US as a plaintiff against a research group who have a research project ready to go to study post-traumatic stress disorder, treating it with MDMA and or cannabis. The research project, fully legit, all approved with a university. I think within a week they had 3 different lawful suppliers of MDMA, but months and years later they still didn't have a supply of medical cannabis to use in this research. So somehow they got NIDA up in court, and NIDA explained that they don't fund or offer cannabis for research into medical beneficial purposes. They only really supply cannabis to find negative consequences of its use. And that's all, and they're quite entitled to. In fact, they said several times, I've read the transcripts of this court case, they don't have to, they're not compelled to supply cannabis to any research body that so chooses to request it. And their policy was that they'll only really supply it to show negative consequences. This cannabis, by the way, is grown every other year at the University of Mississippi, and the owners of that cannabis, of that lawful source, is Monsanto. So that's where we stand on this, and that's why every country in the world is in the same situation, the lack of a lawful source of cannabis. And Yeah, so we've got our work cut out. Governments are feeling the pressure all over the world, and I suppose that's one thing that links us to a lot of other governments in the world. The people are standing up. The people are seeing through the double speak, the spin, and some governments, I would imagine, are just too embarrassed to say, hey, we can't get a supply of medical cannabis. It's owned by NIDA. It's distributed by this mob. And it's owned by Monsanto, and we just can't get it. And I don't think we've really been able to get a government to fully articulate that. But about the closest you can get is a government will, when they're pushed right to it, they'll talk about issues with supply. They can't import any. And basically that's what's going on, and that's the same for all over the country. So it's more important now, I suppose, than ever, while momentum is building and while it is around medical cannabis, and without having to, everyone pile onto paediatric epilepsy, because not everyone has that, but the other conditions that are now being more and more recognised, it's really opening up the way for people to really approach their politicians and keeping their feet to the fire. Have a look at the promises they're making and keep them to it. I've been at it for a long time. I've watched politicians come, make promises, big promises, and go. You hardly get time to catch them up on their promises. But as long as we have that constant, the people are more educated, more informed, and well aware of the doublespeak and I suppose the nature of what we're trying to get done. It really is it's a federal issue. We need, the narrative really should be coming out of Susan Lee and the Prime Minister, not a federal, not a state premier or a state health minister who have been, as you notice, our state health ministers have been really short on the ground or bare on the ground when it comes to announcements in that way. And there's just a lot of mays and ifs and may and could and would. But what they really should be doing, they aren't. So I don't know whether you got much out of my little talk there, but it's not all negative, but it's more opening your eyes to why it's not going on and opening your eyes to the spin that's being given to you. And might explain why things are taking that long, not only here in Australia, but in other places in the world. And if nothing else, it'll give you a better idea of why these things in those states in the US have got medical cannabis going. They've got citizens initiated referendum. We don't have that here. In Canada, a Bill of Rights which give the court the power to tell a government to change some laws or introduce laws. We don't have that here either. So our work's really cut out here, and but we should keep at it and double the effort. I think it's pretty safe to say the police have backed off a fair bit. If you're a genuine medical cannabis user and you get caught with, what would be considered a medical amount, a few plants and a couple of ounces, I think there's a general back off protocol going on. But then on the other hand too, and this is when these talks first started, one of my first couple of talks were about warning people about the exaggerated claims being made on the net, especially about the therapeutic benefits of cannabis. And Andrew has kind of explained that in more detail to people, but certainly the wild claims about curing cancer and curing Ebola and all sorts of things are not true. Cannabis is a really great therapeutic agent, and if you've got two people with a similar condition, whether it's with cancer going through chemo or something like that, generally you'll find the person using cannabis and with some dietary and lifestyle changes is going to do a lot better than the person who's just following a doctor's orders and scant as they might be. So those talks now, I think people are starting to realise that there's lots of charlatans and snake oil sellers and people out there on the web who I still can't get in my head that they, there and willing to take advantage of people at their most distressed and desperate people. Cannabis is a really cheap thing to grow, and it should be free. It's kind of that cheap, and I think you'll find that most serious people who are doing any kind of supply are very cheap. It shouldn't be an expensive thing. Just because somebody tells you, oh, this oil, you know, it's only $200, but it's going to cure your cancer, people are falling for that and buying it, and it's really distressing for me to see that. So I don't really talk too much about warning people about, you know, the exaggerated claims. I think most people are getting that now. And we're part of this, you know, world community where the same thing is going on. Like in Canada, where they don't even entertain the thought that cannabis can cure cancer. It's just not even a thing over there. But in other countries, it's turned into a big thing. And same with the CBD. The CBD, high CBD issue really only came up more recently. I mean, high CBD varieties of cannabis have been, the main cannabis has been grown right throughout millennia, whether it was in Russia and other parts of Europe, in Ireland. I think it was always recognised that the Indian or the indica that was moved around was always the medicine, and the other was, you know, for cloth and sale and that kind of thing. I think if hemp was such a good medicine, I think somebody would have left us a note a couple of thousand years ago, but that didn't really happen. But by the same token, if you are growing, you know, vast amounts of hemp like I am, I mean, we're technically producing vast amounts of cannabinoids, and nowadays with harvesting and refinement and isolation, yeah, we could be still using a lot of those cannabinoids for meaningful and progressive research. So there's a lot of optimism out there. So, and I want people to remain optimistic, but take on board what you'd consider the pessimistic side, what the governments are really doing overseas. What we're seeing in Canada isn't real. What we're seeing in the States and the US isn't really, you know, feasible or for Australia to tack onto. But we have to keep at it, and we have to keep fighting where we can, and definitely correct governments where they are, and get in with the Hemp Party. If anyone's not a member of the Hemp Party, check it out on the web, and get involved. We've got the federal party will have its AGM in November, at the end of November, and we'll be looking to run candidates in all states in the next federal election. And this is the type of thing that we'll be pumping, and this is the hard part for us. It would suit the Hemp Party if the governments don't do anything in the meantime. We hope that doesn't. We'd love to see medical cannabis get up, but certainly if we go to the next federal election and there's been nothing much done, we'll be certainly letting everybody know that if you're really interested in hemp and medical cannabis and general cannabis law reforms, a good nutrition, good health, good policing, better budgets, the Hemp Party's the party to go for. So thanks everyone for listening. I'll hang around if anyone's got any questions. I can answer any, but thank you. Yeah. Yay. Okay, so the saliva testing is playing a part in what we're talking about today, and also with the hemp seed food. Australia's the only country in the world doing saliva testing in the way that we're doing it. Countries got warned that no saliva testing is recommended, or could be it was reliable or could be recommended. Australian police were the only ones who have taken it on. The police in the background have been absolutely just lying, administratively bullying other departments, especially in a state context. What police are saying is the introduction of hemp seed food in Australia may interfere with saliva testing. It's simply not true. Well, it could be, but what we do know is that the saliva tests aren't reliable. They give false negatives and false positives. Governments were warned if they were going to do it, that governments should weigh up the pros and cons. The pros being that it may deter people from driving on drugs, but the cons being that people will be on drugs, driving, get tested and still produce a negative test. Police have been Look, we suspect there's even police corruption. I know what your police. Well, I know what your police are like up here. We saw the Phil Fitzgerald inquiry, but down in New South Wales, we've had a couple of those, Woods and Mulholland. We're watching just the way that the police are behaving around saliva testing, and there's one company, PathTech Diagnostics Proprietary Limited, that has the sole exclusive rights to supply all these police forces in Australia. We've sought to find out who the owners of that company are. Victoria Police say that they know them. They wouldn't tell us if they're ex-police, but we strongly suspect that they are. You'll see, I think more recently, Queensland Police said they're going to knock off a bit of the random roadside alcohol testing and double the saliva testing. Each one of these saliva tests worth about $49 to the company, something like that, but a full test costs about $900, and I suspect it's more. Somebody's making money from them, and it's only Australian police forces that are doing it. So the police they've held up hemp seed food, and in turn the broader hemp industries over saliva testing. And I noticed in the last month, I have read from Western Australia and from Victoria Police wanting to bring an end to medical cannabis debate, because if we allow medical cannabis, it again will interfere with saliva testing. And so we're chasing that up with the saliva testing. I'm appealing to a district court to have a case heard up there, we'll burrow into the facts about it. So more recently, again, probably most people won't be aware, the Greens Party in New South Wales, the Hemp Party worked with them, and we got 14 questions together under Freedom of Information, and put the questions to police. The police extended their deadline twice, and then were a week late. And of the 14 questions, I think they only answered 7, and they weren't very good answers. In fact, they avoided the main parts that we wanted to know in terms of the due diligence on the company, anything around the company, any testing that was done beforehand, and any reliable proof they had about the hemp seed food interfering with saliva tests. So we're a long way to go on that, and we hope to nip that in the bud before it really becomes an issue more broadly in medical cannabis. Thanks for the question, Andrew. Yeah, so there's lots of things we do, and again, Hemp Party is the only one who's really having a go at that as well. All right, thanks all.
Thanks, Andrew. Next we have Michelle Auer. Michelle is passionate about food as medicine. She lives a holistic lifestyle and belief that nature provides us with everything that our body needs to nourish ourselves, and that includes medical cannabis. Thank you, Michelle.
Hi everyone. Whoops. My name is Michelle, and I have neuroendocrine tumours of the pancreas. Can you hear me? Yeah. And I have neuroendocrine tumours of my pancreas. So approximately 3 in every 100,000 patients are affected per year with NETs. Steve Jobs was one of those patients. I was diagnosed back in December 2012 with parathyroid tumours, and these were removed in the March of 2013. Pretty much straight away, I was very sick. I lost 12 kilos, and I couldn't get off the couch for 3 weeks. I couldn't do anything. So I started researching alternative therapies. By June 2014, I was diagnosed with 3 neuroendocrine tumours in my pancreas. There are usually 4 courses of treatments with NETs: chemo, radiotherapy, surgery, or a drug called lutate. The drug works by using radioactive particles to target the tumour from the inside. My specialists were insistent that I have surgery to remove my pancreas, and with the possibility of my spleen and other organs which may or may not be affected. The outcome of this procedure would determine the next step in relation to one of the various drug options. To complicate the issue, I was then diagnosed with multiple endocrine neoplasia. MEN1, that's the short version, in brief, is a rare condition associated with tumours of the endocrine. So in essence, regardless of what tumours they may remove, more will soon find a home in another part of my endocrine system. Unfortunately, these surgeries produce more complications than the actual symptoms of the tumour themselves, with patients often having major corrective surgeries for years after, and that's if the patient survives. At the moment, medical intervention is there to help purely with the symptoms of this disease. There is no cure for MEN1. And in reality, while most are looking for that magic cure, I just wanted quality of life. Grant told me if I get nervous or anxious to look at him and pretend he's naked, and that would make me feel better, but it's not working. Although feeling very disheartened at my future after that diagnosis, something changed in the way I approached it as time's gone on. I decided that I was not going to be defined by this condition. It's just a small part of me, I'm not part of it. So what I decided to do was take charge of my own life. I decided against all the options presented to me after researching and weighing up all the implications associated with these, and started on a journey to discover just what I needed to help myself overcome this small hiccup in my life. Political science seems to think that they have the monopoly on health, and more often than not, it's the patients that are left to research for themselves all of the options that can be of benefit to them. I want to be able to have the choice to access all medicinal interventions of my life. I find it really interesting that somewhere along our journey into adulthood, we feel the need to give control of ourselves over to a doctor or a specialist without even understanding our own bodies. We pay much more attention to our car than we do to our own body. And the body, like a good car, is remarkable in that if you give it the right fuel to work at its optimum, it will really reward you with longevity. And while I don't think we should turn away from conventional medicine altogether, it should work alongside a healthy alternative food lifestyle for the best outcomes. To choose what you are happiest to do treatment-wise, but to choose it with a fully informed mind. We really do need to take back responsibility for our own bodies and look after it. After all, it is the only place we have to live. I'm not on any medication except what Mother Nature provides for me, and I love where I am now. I know that may seem strange to some, but this disease has changed my life for the better, in that I now look after myself. I live a purely organic, plant-based lifestyle, without dairy, gluten, preservatives, highly processed, refined sugars, or GMO foods. I have 5 plant foods that are my non-negotiables every day. Aside from carrots, everyone's always saying to me, "Oh, you look so orange, you must have something wrong with your liver." But I eat like about 3 kilos of carrots a day, I juice. But my 5 non-negotiable plant foods are hemp seeds, coconut oil, broccoli sprout powder, turmeric, and this year I started on a new herb. So my motto is, if it's made from a plant, I eat it. If it's made in a plant, I don't. I'm incredibly passionate about lifting the veils of secrecy and illusion around nutrition that society has been fed from corporations. It becomes very difficult to make food choices when we are bombarded from trusted groups that are feeding us misinformation every day. I know that having a good food lifestyle plays a huge role in healing the body because I've lived for nearly 3 years using this holistic approach to my health, and have done a lot of research into the benefits of food for medicine and medicinal cannabis in that time. I believe medicinal cannabis must be used as a whole plant therapy to be of any use to me. And like all plant foods, having legal access to medicinal cannabis will allow me a much longer and healthier life. It has been proven to reduce and cure cancers in the endocrine system of the body, and that's a fact. You can look that up. Knowing this plant is key to the reduction and longevity of most illnesses and diseases, I want to be able to have the freedom of using this plant without feeling like I'm a criminal. The burden of having to cope with a chronic or terminal illness is hard enough, without the added pressure of the fear of prosecution for using a plant, because in reality that is all it is. In my opinion, it is a crime that the Australian government does not see medicinal cannabis for what it is, a plant that saves lives, and we just want the right to live. If cannabis were a new discovery rather than a well-known substance carrying cultural and political baggage, it would be hailed as a wonder drug. What I choose to do is live my life regardless of what the government says I can or can't do. My test results have, since changing my lifestyle for food, for medicine, meditation, and as Nikki said, accepting and letting go of the baggage that no longer served me, are better than they ever were before I got sick. I have not needed to take any medications at all, not even a Panadol. I haven't had a headache for nearly 3 years. My endocrinologist, although he doesn't agree with what I do, he at least supports me, and that is all I can ask. I go for my next MRI on Tuesday, and at the very least I'm hopeful that they are stable. A reduction would be great though. And I really live by this proverb. When diet is wrong, medicine is of no use. When diet is correct, medicine is of no need. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Michelle. We've just about come to the end. I just wanted to say on behalf of the MCUA, at the present time, a supply shortage forces patients to black market dealers, further strengthening their consumer base where the product is unknown. And more patients have chosen to grow their own medicine to alleviate this interruption of their medicine and to know exactly what has gone into the growing of that plant and what has gone on to it as well during its life cycle. I want to thank all of the speakers today. I also want to thank Michael Balderstone for coming up today from Nimbin. And I want to thank all of you people for coming here today. Please inform your friends and relatives of what you've learned today. There'll be further MCUA workshops coming up in coming months. Okay, Sunshine Coast in December, but we're looking at nationwide education. Now you have some of the tools to educate. I want to say thank you to Nikki and BJ for coming all the way up from Newcastle as well. And I'm into their time now, so I'll just pass over the microphone to Nikki and BJ. Thank you.
It's nothing like being put on the spot, eh? Any questions and answers on the simple place of living well and healthy and what it can do for you when you embrace your own health? What I'll talk about now, I suppose, quickly is my privilege and gratitude for having worked with Andrew for the last couple of months. Two things come to mind very quickly, and I don't want to talk for too long. I was privileged to go with Andrew to a Greens bill that they were trying to push through, John Kay, I think his name was, a couple of years ago in Sydney at the New South Wales Parliament House. And Dr. Alex Wodak spoke, and Andrew spoke, and a few people spoke. And I was privileged just to stand up and go and say something. And I had wanted to say to them to understand what that to stand in a room or sit in a room of highly intelligent people was an indictment to my intelligence on whether or not this plant should be legal or not. I didn't say that. I just said to them that we were doing it anyway and that they better step up and support us because we're going to keep doing it. The crucial thing is this is our herb. It's not theirs. It's not a commodity, it's a life essential. It needs to be in our diets from a young plant being stuck in a smoothie for a child all the way through to maybe concentrates that hopefully heal people. Crucially, the other thing that I was able to experience with Andrew at Parliament House was a discussion with a politician. This little man from the National Party of Northern New South Wales, or Central New South Wales, somewhere around Tamworth area, I think, had the audacity to say to Andrew after this crazy discussion of volatile words where they nearly threw us out of the place. But he said to Andrew, why do you keep doing this? You've been 20 years doing this thing and you've lost. You haven't won. And Andrew, like a six gun, came out and said, because I'm dealing with stupid politicians. I'd rather be dealing with sick kids. So that's the energy of Andrew. You push a button of knowledge that you require on Andrew and he'll either know about it straight away or very soon afterwards he will know about it. His passion to understand what we can do, the potential of embracing creation's gifts, not laboratory's gifts, is amazing. And it's a privilege to work with him. Nikki, astounding herbalist of a natural style, understanding that our bodies are amazing machines to heal. Focus on the good part of your system. Focus on the health side of your system. Focus on your mental health. Mental health is, Jesus, it's big in society. It's 1 in 3 people is on some sort of antidepressant capsule. Wow. Obviously, nutrition starts in the gut. This is what we're learning now. So please, hemp seeds are crucial. We do have a mail order system now with the Church of Ubuntu to mail off things around the country, and we haven't been stopped at all. We'll mail a lot of stuff around the country. So take back your sovereignty, people. Don't listen to the fear that they're going to push on you about having government-controlled medicine and government-controlled this and government-controlled that. The horses have bolted. We've been doing this for a while, and there's a lot of good medicine makers around the country. Focus on your own health. Do it in community first. Do it in the space of where you take back your own community. To me, the herb tells us to go back to community. It can be grown in community, it can be distributed in community, to the point that they have no choice to let us just do what we need to do with it. If they want to come and kick doors in and whatever, well, then we might have to retaliate with that. But at the end of the day, this is our chance to be at one with this herb and all the herbs and all the foods on the planet. We can't take their shit anymore. No more. And with people like Andrew and the Hemp Party and Michael Balderston's amazing leadership there. And unfortunately, I can't do the political thing. To me, that's a load of crap. We have to actually follow these guys who've never got the runs on the board. To play their game is actually condoning their game. And I do understand other people have other opinions on that, but this is our herb. It's got nothing to do with them. Remember, it's a life essential. It's not a commodity.